Well, to those of you that have been following me on this journey adventure that I'm going on in Mexico right now, the adventure has certainly continued this past week. So I'm trying to think, I want to share a little bit. And what is the theme? Confronting fear on a very visceral, physical level, and how fear can really keep us from living, and yet the threat of danger can make us feel very alive. But almost like looking at this piece of every human being is afraid of death, right? And yet there really is no death because the soul is infinite and immortal. If that's not your belief, then maybe it's a totally different story for you, but I can only share from my perspective and my belief system, which I do believe we are immortal beings in that sense. Yes, we have this physical container as we're in human form, but when we pass, we don't die. We just wake up from the dream and we return home, essentially. So let's just say, when you experience something where you're on the edge of danger, it really makes you look at these things. So I'm going to share a story and weave in. We'll see. We'll weave in the philosophy and the old bits of being human in the process of it. So stay with me, if you will. This is Corinne Bloom, and you're listening to Raw Conversations. So as you know, I've talked a lot in the past about fear and about trust, but there's something when it happens on a very physical level where you get the experience of it in a very, very real way. Not to say that emotional fear and just the feeling of trust. I mean, trust is always kind of an ambiguous one, right? Because it's not something that we can necessarily point to. Trust is a feeling, it's a knowing, it's an energy. That's why I find that whole world so fascinating, because it's not always tangible. You know, you can say, oh, I trust a person, or I don't trust a person. But what is trust? It's a feeling, right? Fear also has this, there's emotional fear, there's instinctual fear, there's, the physicality and the visceralness of fear that can come through. So it's all very interesting, but there's a lot of nuance in it. But when you're confronted with the physical, I'm going to tell you the story in a moment. When you're confronted with the physicality of that experience, it really can open up a portal to seeing things in a very different way. So let me jump to the story. So I was staying in Tulum, which is not a place that I was particularly wanting to go to, but I kind of found myself there because of being able to find a good Airbnb for a couple weeks. And a lot of other places were booked in different areas that I'd wanted to go to. But I had some people that said they loved it. It was amazing. They told me an area that was safe to stay in. And I had some other people, from before that were like, oh God, just avoid it, avoid it for so-and-so reasons. And also saying that, yeah, it can be dangerous. But I went to this particular place that I thought was deemed to be safe. And there's definitely a kind of energy there, which is not necessarily my kind of vibe. But we made the most of it and had some beautiful, wonderful times. Also had some adventures on the scooter, being taken down roads that shouldn't be going down, that kind of thing. So there was always a bit of an edge, because you have this interesting juxtaposition, odd juxtaposition actually, between, one side of the street is the boho chic apartments, and it's directly across from the slums. And you'll have one nice paved road with nice little signs that tell you which way to go and what the name of the road is. And then you'll have a just gravel road with massive holes and big puddles and jungle on both sides. And I got caught through one of those at night. That wasn't so fun. So it's an odd place. It's like a third world country trying to jump directly to first. And it kind of doesn't work. It's a bit weird. And yet, I find that the people are very kind and always smiling. And so that was always lovely. But there was always an edge. But I had a very strong intuition the penultimate day, that I had to return the scooter, and I just was like, I'm not bringing it into the town that people say can be dangerous. I'm just like, I'm not going to do it. I have a child, and I don't want to. I'm not going to. So I had arranged for the woman to come pick up the scooter, and she was coming later and later and later and later. And it's, by the time she came, it was 8 p.m. I normally don't go out, but it was fun. I was just literally coming down to just outside of my apartment. And there's a little cafe on the corner. It's a pedestrian road, but then there's, cars that can drive next to it. And we were waiting outside, and all of a sudden a pickup truck with a bunch of guys in the back drives down the road, kind of in the direction of our road, and is going slowly. And I just immediately was like, that doesn't fit. That doesn't look right here. I'd been there for 2 weeks, and I was like, there's something off about that. And I could feel myself kind of turning. It was like I almost wanted to I had written that it's like I wanted to put a glass wall between the energies. There was something, I was like, I needed to protect mine and my daughter's energy. And they kind of slowly went around the corner, and they drove off. My daughter says she swears she saw the silhouette, or basically what looked like a rifle. And I kind of had this feeling like, I want to go inside, but I was waiting. It's just so interesting when you can feel your intuition, you can feel your instinct, you can feel energy. For those that don't believe in energy, you can feel it when it ain't right. I'll tell you that much. So they drove off, and a few minutes later, though, we could hear the pa, 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 pa. And yeah, there's only two sounds that can make that. And it's either gunshots or fireworks. And there was no holiday or kids in the neighborhood to warrant having kind of fireworks. So we assumed, and so did the waiter at the cafe, assumed that, no, those are gunshots. And this is in an area where that doesn't happen. And it's an interesting experience when you're that close, you're that close. And I found myself being very calm and very focused, and, needing to get my child inside, even though I knew that they won't go for tourists, right? If you get caught in the line, that's when things go bad in the line of fire. But this is, gang war. But still, it's the edge of a very, very dark shadow. And, the shock didn't really kick in until later, where you're like, wow, yeah, that's scary. That's scary. If you haven't grown up in a place where that happens in your neighborhood. I mean, it was interesting. The waiter was basically saying to the people coming out, there was a couple coming out, and he warned them against it. No, I'll go, gracias, and it's kind of like there's something normal about it. So for those of us that's not normal, it's interesting what it does to your nervous system, where you can be very focused and you can be very calm, and yet, God, I wouldn't want to live in that kind of environment. But the really interesting, beautiful thing that came out of that I want to share with you is I ended up having a whole conversation with my daughter about life, about being souls that are eternal, about how there's ultimately nothing to fear, even though, of course, in the physical experience, in the physical human body, the human part of us gets scared. The human part of us is afraid of death. I mean, look at how much we try to avoid death. Look at what's happened in the last couple of years, that because of the fear of death, people hold fear every single day. And it shrinks you. When fear is cowering over you, it shrinks you, it debilitates you, it creates anxiety, it keeps you from living. So you're afraid of death, but you're living a deadened life because you're not fully alive, because you're so afraid of death. It's ironic, right? But when you really recognize, this is what came through to me. There was the shock. And there was a part of it that was scary, but there was also a part of me that in that moment knew, a very big part of me, or I would say all of me, just fundamentally knows, just innately knows that's not my fate. And I'm not just saying that because, everyone thinks, oh, nothing bad is going to happen to me. But when you just really know that is not my fate, so I don't need to be afraid that anything is going to happen to me. But also, if you want to take it onto another higher level, if you trust your fate, because we all have our destiny, right? There's a lot of free will and there's choice, but I do believe that the way we exit this world has been predetermined when we come in. So what if we were to profoundly trust that I will go when it's my time to go, and I will go in the way that I chose to go? That's crazy, right? Because we think that we want to control, or that we can control everything. And of course, it doesn't mean like go off and be stupid and be like, oh, but I know the way that I'm going to die. No, I mean, we are in a physical reality. And of course, we have to be wise, right? But what I'm talking about is like unnecessary fear, unnecessary sense of like everything needs to be safe, and we need to be kind of paranoid about every little step that we take along the way. So really what this trip is, and I know I've talked a lot about it, is just really dropping into profound, radical trust. And this is just another layer of it. And there was something that was I almost felt euphoric. I almost felt like this happiness and excitement. It was very strange, because here was something that happened that was quite shocking and quite scary. But we were having this conversation about, this is kind of like a video game. It's like a simulation. And when it's done and when we leave, like, we don't actually die. We just wake up from the dream. We come out of the game and we go home, and we always see our loved ones on the other side. And I'm not saying this, you might have a religious perspective view. That's fine. I'm not personally coming from that perspective. I just really believe that we come out of this game, this experience that we've chosen to come and have. And it is a school of life. We're learning, we're growing. Our soul is growing. And actually, what I think is beautiful, it's just a slight twist variation in the saying, is that, in the spiritual realm, you hear a lot of people saying we're spiritual beings having a human experience. But we always feel like the human is growing, right? Personal development, inner work, we're growing, and we think the human is growing, the ego is growing. But actually, I loved when someone said, no, the soul is growing. And I've always believed that. That's always been true to me. It's like, the soul comes to want to learn a lesson, or many lessons, and it chooses kind of its, the childhood setup, our parents. We have certain agreements with certain souls that come in, and maybe they play the good partner or the bad partner, the good guy or the bad guy, the good girl or the bad girl, you know what I mean? And then there's a lot, of course, free will in the mix, potentially, but it's all a place of growth. But it's really the soul that has gone, I want to go to Earth, I want to have this experience of being human, and I want to stretch myself. I want to learn things that maybe I can't access in the kind of infinite world, like emotions. This is why I think emotions are such amazing things that we shouldn't be vilifying and ignoring and rejecting and neglecting. It's like, no, there's a wisdom to this. There's a language in this. There's a way of being through this. Use what we've been given. Why would we come here and be like, no, I'm not going to use that. I'm not going to listen to that. I actually had a profound session with a client the other day where we really went into all of these things, like all of the emotions. Okay, what is this showing you? What is this wanting to communicate? What does this want to say? And it just needs your loving presence to listen. And it was so simple to go through the emotions. No story, very little story. But to go through the motions and understand what was it that they needed to express, how did they need to be heard, and what did they need in order to feel like it was okay, and to evolve beyond that held, stored feeling. We are incredibly wise. Our beings are incredibly wise. Our soul, our higher self, is incredibly wise, and it is always guiding us if we're there to listen. So coming back to this story, when you kind of can tap into that place, like I said, honor the fact that there is physical fear. Honor the fact that for the ego, death feels like a death, right? But this is a dance between the human self and the soul self. And when we remember that we are a soul, the human element, if we can trust the soul, if we can trust the higher self, then even if there is physical fear in the human experience, when you can rise up to the eagle eye perch, and view it from above, I was liberated from the fear. It's like, yeah, that's scary, but I could have gone into complete, like, shrivel, shrunken, contracted mode. And the funny thing is that we started laughing and we were having this conversation. And even the next morning, my daughter's like, Mama, I'm not scared today. And I genuinely believed her, because we processed it. We talked about it. We felt the human aspect of it. We held each other. We're like, wow, that was shocking. That was intense. But then we rose above also into like the compassion of why are beings like this? What are they playing out on earth? And then we rose above it to the greater, which is we're never going to truly die. We're never going to truly die. And I think when we can understand that, not just understand that, but really feel that, like I really felt it viscerally, and I felt it energetically and emotionally, then you can let go of the grip of fear. And we've been living under the grip of fear for thousands of years. We've been ruled by fear. We've been manipulated by fear. It's been indoctrinated. It's been, ensued threaded through society for so long now. And fear is the one thing that can appear to control the soul, which is ultimately uncontrollable. I know I'm going far out today. But when you have experiences like that where you are on the edge of danger, like what if the guy that they were looking to kill was on that corner? They probably would have taken a shot, So when you're that close to danger, it's like, wow, okay, I want to live. I'm laughing because, I made this whole move and this adventure to come here because I was feeling so dead on the inside. I feel like the universe is like, you want to feel alive? Here you go. We're going to make you feel alive every day. And I'm like, okay, I got it. Thank you. I feel very enlivened. I feel like life has been, it's pulsing back through my veins again. There's no doubt about it. So now I'm asking for a little bit more tranquility, a little bit more balance. But yeah, I felt very alive because when we face death, we have to face life, right? Because death is the loss of life, this life. But most of the time, I think we're living not fully alive. And so there's nothing like an experience like that. There's nothing like throwing yourself into the unknown, into discomfort, as I've been talking about these weeks. But when you're at the threat of danger, not that I'd want to live on that edge every single day. No way. That was enough. But when you're there, there's something like, right, live, appreciate that you're alive and you're living. And also trust, let go, don't let fear have a noose around your neck. Don't let it grip you and hold on to you and make you small. Because if you can fundamentally trust that you're going to be okay, even if you go through shit, even if you go through some horror stories, what if you were to trust that that's where your higher self is guiding you, because that's part of the lesson. That's part of that. That's like the course that you're on at school. That's the subject. Like, just what if? What if we were really to trust that? So that nothing could be so bad or so terrible or so terrifying, even if to the human physical experience it does feel like that. But again, remember, this is like the combination, the dance, the marriage between the human self and the soul self having this experience. So it was a very profound experience for me, because even though I was very glad to be leaving the next day, I wouldn't have wanted to stay there. It's always like, what do you take out of an experience? It's not about reliving it, but what do you take from it? What do you learn from it? And certainly what I experienced from it and the wisdom that I gleaned from it was, firstly, just when you profoundly trust your higher self and your fate, and you can let go of the grip of that fear, it's like you can exhale. There's like a relief, freedom. And I've recognized how on this journey, because it's so unknown and all of these things, that, yeah, there's always been this edge of, making sure that we're going to be okay. And yet, also, I already found that the moments that I would just lean in and trust and surrender, that's when there was more flow. And that's when it was more enjoyable. When you're in fear and anxiety, it's never fun. So this is true to anything. It's not just traveling. It's not having a story where you need to be around the corner from a shooting. It could be your fear of your own potential. It could be fear of expressing yourself, communicating. It could be fear of falling in love. It could be fear of being loved, being in a relationship. It could be a fear of a job. It could be fear of moving home, moving country. We could have a fear about literally everything. And what if we were just to profoundly trust our path, our soul's path, what we're going to learn along the way? What is it that we need to learn along the way? And that nothing is here to punish us. There is no punishment. There's experience, there's learning, there's growth, there's evolution. So I felt compelled to share this story because, it's hard to kind of put it into words, but I think we are coming into a time where, all these old structures are coming down, all these belief systems are coming down. And that's a big part of my work with people, right, is deconstructing and letting go of belief systems that don't support them, stories that aren't true, of identities that form themselves around those stories and those belief systems that are not serving them because they're not true. They're not authentically you. And so in this deconstruction, we're letting go of fear, we're letting go of shame. The big one is we're letting go of judgment. And I think through that, we are coming back home to our true nature, which is love and compassion, trust, connection, hopefully a lot more beauty, peace, harmony, balance. But I remember Darius Wright saying he's kind of a quote unquote master of out of body experiences. He has a technique so that there's a controlled way of doing it. And he says, whenever you leave the body, and this is true when you die, because it's no different, you're just having a controlled kind of mini death, but you're able to come back into your body. He's like, you have to go through your fear. You have to face your fear. Once you pass through the veil, you have to face your fear until you can kind of go home, essentially. And I resonated with that because I feel that a lot of my work and my perspective is you have to embrace your fear to return home to who you truly are and feel liberated within yourself, to feel fully free. As long as the fear is ruling the roost and you are in denial or in rejection of it, or you're avoiding or circumventing, it's going to chase you like a dark figure in the middle of the night. Doesn't matter what the fear is about. When you face it and embrace it and you see that you are more than that the fear is not bigger than you. You are so much bigger and more powerful and more potent and more everything than it is. Then you can let it go, And I loved what he said, that he would, when he passed through to the other side, that he would be confronted with his fears that felt very real. You could say it's a simulation, but it was very real. And you could call them entities, all of these things. And he learned to have these kind of techniques as to how to protect himself and all of that. And then he just got to the point where he's like, you know what? No, it's not even about creating the protection and the techniques. It was just like, I'm not giving it my attention. It's not there. Nothing can hurt me. Nothing can harm me. This is from a soul perspective. And I think there is, I look at that from the internal perspective of our inner world. People are so afraid of their emotions. They're so afraid of fear and sadness and anger and all of these things. And actually, if you try to protect yourself from them, there's more fear. It just creates more fear because there's something to be afraid of. But when you see these are just parts of us that are messengers, they're speaking to us. They're sharing, they're wanting to share something with us. They're wanting us to see, hear, and understand them. Who on this planet doesn't want to be seen, heard, and understood? We all do. Those are very basic needs. Why would our emotions be any different? But we've vilified them, right? And so we reject them and we disconnect from them and we create the separation. Whereas actually everything, any point of pain, fear, sadness in our beings need to be looked at, heard, understood, and ultimately embraced, loved. And that's what melts and alchemizes them. And that's what liberates us. So I've said 1,000,001 times, I'll say it 1,000,002, the only way out is through. The only way out is through. And that's where the liberation is that we're seeking. And it doesn't mean that we're not going to get scared again, and it doesn't mean that we're not going to have challenges, but it's the way that we face them, it's the way that we move through them, it's the way that we be with them. This whole life journey is, how do you take yourself by the hand and walk yourself through this experience back home? First, it's where do we find the inner home within us as we're here in human form on this planet. But then also the essential, the true home is when we pass and we go to the other side and we really go back to our home. Again, my belief, but I can only share from my perspective. So, yeah, the invitation, I think, is always walk towards yourself, walk towards your experience, walk towards your emotions, embrace them, learn from them. And I think we have to just remember, especially if you're spiritually inclined, this is we're sometimes coming in and out of the human perspective, ego perspective, fear, and the soul perspective, which is much more expansive and much more fundamentally, inherently, I should say, trusting, right? And it's okay to go between the two. I've talked to so many clients of mine that will say, oh God, I was in this beautiful, expansive space and everything was trusting and flowing. And then, I went into like fear and now I'm worried and I feel depressed. And it's like, yeah, that's okay. That's part of it. It doesn't make us bipolar. It's just part of it, So it's okay. It's really okay. But give yourself the permission to live. Don't let fear make you small. Don't let fear of the what if make you small. And that could even be like, sending a text message to communicate with the person that you're dating, or where I want to do a whole episode on communication, and that's a whole separate topic. It just made me think into an example about ghosting and miscommunication and misunderstanding. That's a whole other thing. But basically, a lot of people, that's where their fear comes up. And it's amazing how fear will stop us in our tracks. Again, whether it's physical, energetic, emotional, most especially, most of the time. We're facing fear most of the time, it's imagined. And so there's nothing like when you deal with actual fear and danger, that it wakes something up in you, which is actually quite profound and beautiful. Again, don't want to experience again. I don't want to do it again. But so what is the invitation for today? Walk back home to yourself. Anything that you find along the path, befriend it. Hold it. Hold its hand. Give it a hug. Bring it to your heart. Melt it with your love. Stop running away from yourself. Stop running around what seems like an obstacle, but maybe it's actually the way. Yeah, I'm going to leave it at that. And as always, well, before I say that, treat yourself with kindness and compassion and patience, because being human is not an easy journey, but it's certainly an interesting one, isn't it? All right, I'll leave it there. As always, take it or leave it as feels right for you, and loving you from afar. You've been listening to Raw Conversations with Corinne Bloom. Thanks so much for showing up, listening in, and being a part of the conversation with me.